FERC professionals, hello. Welcome to our first ever webcast of the HData FERC Professionals Group. We're trying something new. We're doing a live webcast from the 2022 NARUC Annual Meeting and Education Conference. We've never done a live webcast before. We're attracting some onlookers already, so that's exciting for us. If you've ever watched sports on ESPN, if you've ever watched college game days, then this might be kind of familiar for you because we're hoping to do a live webcast even while the conference is going on behind me and all around me. HData is here in the exhibition hall at the NARUC conference, and we've been talking to commissioners and chairs and members of staff of our nation's state utility commissions for the last couple of days. The theme of the conference that we're attending is innovative, disruptive technology. That makes us very excited because that's one thing that we're trying to do in the utility regulatory space. As many of you know, the whole reason why we have a business is because of some innovation in regulation. Last year, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission decided that it was going to stop using PDF documents for its reports and was instead going to adopt a digital format for FERC Form 1, FERC Form 3Q, and the same comparable forms for gas and oil. That transformation from PDF documents into data has transformed the way that energy regulation works. Because we now have data instead of documents, we can digitally analyze the performance of every utility. We can automatically track finance across time and across different entities. So we've been able to describe that to both regulators and regulated here at the NARUC Annual Conference. We have an amazing lineup of guest speakers that we're going to welcome as we put together this live webcast. And I'll run through who they are in a minute just to amp up the anticipation. And then after that, we're going to describe a bit more about what our digital platform does. But why? I want to answer the question first. What are we doing at NARUC? Why is HData participating as a sponsor? Why are we joining this event? Well, the reason really is that when you take all of the different state regulators and then the representatives of utilities that join them at this conference, it's a chance for us to see where those relationships are beginning. And it's a chance for us to track those relationships between the regulator and regulated. And that's where we can help. We can take so much of the work that regulators have to do and so much of the manual reports that the regulated have to put together, and we can make that work much easier. We can automate so much of that, because when you automate, then that means that both the regulator and regulated can stop focusing on the spreadsheets and instead focus on the substance. We've been privileged to talk to many of the state utility commissions that are gathered here, and then we've been able to meet some of the regulated entities as well. Let me tell you whom you're about to meet. Our first guest in this first ever webcast is going to be Cindy Menhorn. She's the vice president at MCR Performance Solutions. She's a rate designer. After Cindy joins us, we're going to be interviewing Mishal Thadani. He's the founder at a startup called Rhizome. After that, we'll be joined by Nick Wagner, the VP Colorado Regulatory Affairs at Black Hills Energy. And then finally, Brad Johnson, who's been elected twice as a commissioner of the Montana Public Service Commission and is currently serving as vice chairman of the PSC. So we're very excited. First, I'm very thrilled to welcome Cindy Menhorn, vice president at MCR Performance Solutions, to talk a bit about what we're learning so far at NARUC. Cindy, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure, Hudson. Thanks for having me.
Cindy, tell us a bit about MCR Performance Solutions, and then we'd love to ask you about this conference.
Okay, MCR Performance Solutions is a boutique consulting firm. We do consulting for utilities only, water, gas, and electric. I head up our rates and regulatory practice, so I've been a standard person that comes to this meeting just about every time I can. So unless there's a client that needs me more, I'm here.
Sometimes that happens, right?
Yes, it absolutely does.
Well, tell us a bit about rate design, and then we'd love to ask about this conference. What is rate design?
Well, rate design is a way to make sure that the utilities have the ability to recover their revenue requirements, but it's an art. It's not a science, because it's more than just taking a total number and then dividing it by kilowatt hours or number of customers per se, because you really want the customers to understand the kind of rate that they are paying for, and you also want them to be able to change their behavior if they need to save money.
So it's not just a business decision by the by the utility.
No. This goes through the regulatory process. So this is the rate case, or would be something that rate design is part of the rate case that goes through, and the regulators have to approve it at the different commissions.
What's the most difficult aspect of balancing all of those different interests? The interest of the ratepayer, the interest of the utility, which has to be able to sustain what it's doing, and then also all these public policy considerations.
Well, that's interesting. You should ask, Hudson, because as I'm going through this particular conference, we hear a lot about grid resiliency and reliability, and it's very, very important. All of the climate activities that have happened lately, it's really important for us to get ready for getting our utilities to net zero. And one of the challenges that you may remember is back when everybody thought, well, smart meters were the answer. Everybody,
I remember that being a thing.
Everybody thought smart meters would be the answer. But let me tell you, unless you have smart rates to go with those smart meters, they're not really utilizing what they need to be utilized for. So in other words, as I'm listening to these demand response and the beneficial electrification and everything that's, we are deep into at MCR Performance Solutions, it's having the ability to have a rate so that the customer can react to that rate. So ideally data.
Right.
I mean, that's the key. And if I were to say, what would my wish list be as far as data, what it would be is I would have the ability for every customer, whether it's a residential, a mom and pop store, a commercial customer, an industrial, to have real-time pricing. And in order for them to have real-time pricing, they need the infrastructure to have that pricing. I don't want them to have to worry about turning their thermostats up and down. I want it to be automatic.
Yeah.
And I think that's the answer when you talk about smart rates and smart meters.
Well, that's an aspiration for the future, and it's one that we can work toward, I think, from the public policy angle and from technology as well.
Right.
And that brings us to the theme of the conference. It's innovative, disruptive technology and regulation. What are a few of the things, Cindy, that maybe you didn't know that you've learned from the sessions at this conference?
Well, it's all. I always learn something at these conferences. It's really important to see other people's perspectives. So, I work across the country, but I don't know everything that's going on in every
Right.
state. So it's always important for me to continue to learn what other states are doing and what's working in other states, and what regulators like to see and what regulators don't like to see.
Right.
Because if I'm going before a new client and it's a new commission, then I have a better idea of what I want to propose to them from a rate design perspective.
So what are you learning from these sessions? Are there things that have jumped out at you that understanding that you wouldn't have had you not had a chance to come and join there?
Yes, and there's always something. I sat in on a really interesting panel this morning about demand response and all the electrification and everything that we are going through as a firm for clients, but just how to marry the energy efficiency and demand response and the electrification all together. And it's helped.
That sounds really valuable. So it's prediction time. Thinking about the theme of our conference, that technology is changing the way that utility regulation works, what's one prediction you'd like to make for the next 5 years about the technological transformation of utility regulation?
Well, that one of the things that I would like to see is the ability for customers to be able to modify their behavior without it being too cumbersome, if you will. Recently, you hear about on and off peak rates and all that, but what customer is going to move, if they're a restaurant, their service to later in the day? Nobody. It's unrealistic. So to come up with the load curve where actually the load is smaller during the day, then the customers can get the benefit of lower prices without having to do anything.
Is that possible?
Yes. Yes, it's possible with renewables, it's possible with solar, it's possible with all those things that are coming to play.
That's a really optimistic message. We're encouraging folks that are participating in this afternoon to be blunt, but blunt optimism is good too.
I want optimism too.
Cindy, any other thoughts that you want to make sure to share with our audience? I should probably tell you, our FERC Professionals group includes a number of commissions. We have some commission staff that are joining us remotely because they weren't able to attend the conference, and then also the regulators, or the regulated utilities, and then a few tech companies that are trying to transform the way that utility regulation works. So thinking about those constituencies, any closing thoughts you'd like to share?
Yes, I would. And one thing is, it's always important to work together. But right now, with everything that is going on with net zero and grid resiliency and reliability, and the ability to have the data so that customers can react to how they're using their electricity, I think is extremely important. And I think, it's going to be very definitely working together with the regulators, working with all the commissions and all the utilities. And there's solutions out there. It's just, I think everybody has to be open to new ideas.
I think so. Well, Cindy, thank you so much for joining our webcast this afternoon. We'll definitely put your contact information into the bar so that people can contact you if they need to, and look forward to continuing to work with you on all this.
Thank you much.
Thank you so much. Oh, you've got your mouse with you. Okay, that sounds really good. We're going to be joined next by the Vice Chair of the Montana Public Service Commission. We're just grabbing him from around our crowd, and we're going to have him take a seat in just a moment here. Mr. Vice Chair, come on by. Here we go. Thanks so much for joining us.
You bet. Happy to be here.
Please join me, remote audience, in welcoming Brad Johnson, elected as a commissioner of the Montana Public Service Commission, and has served as chair and as vice chair of the commission. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Appreciate the opportunity to visit.
So you've attended how many national conferences of NARUC?
Well, this is my 6th annual fall meeting. We missed 2 during COVID, of course, but so I've been a commissioner for just short of 8 years, and would have been to 8 of these had we not had the COVID adventure.
That's right. And so you'll be rolling off, right?
I am subject to term limits, and my 2nd term ends in January. So yes, I'll be starting a new chapter in life.
So it's bittersweet.
It is. It's always welcome the adventure of new opportunities, and but I've really enjoyed the work I've done in the regulatory world, and would have welcomed an opportunity to serve 4 more years. But you don't get everything you want in life, right?
It's true. I've got 2 key questions for you. First, I want to ask about what you're learning at this NARUC conference, and it's especially tinged, I guess, because you won't be attending one as the chair or the vice chair again, maybe in other capacities. And then second, we'd like to ask for some technological predictions.
Okay.
So first, even though this is your 6th, it's definitely my first national annual conference, your 6th. What are some of the key things that you might not have learned had you not had the opportunity to be here?
Well, I think the result of a number of the conversations that I've been involved in, and a couple of the panels that I've sat in, is that, and I hate to say it, but in a lot of ways, when we talk about resource adequacy and meeting capacity needs, things are maybe worse even than I thought coming in, and that the challenges are more widespread. We certainly have been focusing on those challenges in the Western region. We've known for some time how serious it is there, but I sat through a panel yesterday where they're talking about possibly shedding load to gas customers in New England if the weather gets too severe. And Arizona's up against some real challenges in terms of meeting their demand for natural gas. So we've got issues not just in the West, but literally all over the country. And there are no silver bullets or easy answers at this point to address those issues.
I think as a society, we tend to assume that we've solved the problems of in a wealthy culture such as we have. We tend to assume that we've solved the problems of easy availability of energy. Sometimes it's expensive, but it's at least available. Are you saying that we shouldn't have that assumption?
I think that we as a nation have a history of being reactive rather than proactive. We are sometimes at our best when we're responding to a crisis, that's not necessarily a good thing.
Right,
but it's I think where we're at. As I talk to folks, I don't think there's a broad understanding or awareness of just how precarious our position is in terms of resource adequacy in this country. And I'm afraid that it may be a situation where we're going to have that crisis to motivate us. I characterize the discussion this way, that picture a graph, and this point on the graph is the current resource stack and carbon footprint. There's no arguing about that. It's what it is.
That's the resource stack.
And over here, at some point, that resource stack and that carbon footprint is going to be down here, totally different.
Right.
And the question that we're dealing with, especially as regulators, is can we have a controlled glide path from A to B, or are we going to let forces that, in my view, are to a great degree emotionally driven, force us to a cliff and a crisis partway through? Right now, my theory is the cliff and the crisis folks are winning. We are making decisions about baseload generation and resource adequacy that simply aren't based in reality. That's what I told somebody the other day. The only thing missing from this conversation today nationally is reality. Everything else is great. But
it's a big gap then.
It is.
If you're missing reality. I'm curious about the predictions that you would then make. Our theme is disruptive technology and regulation here at this conference, and I think that there's an optimistic thesis that we can solve these problems with technology. We can solve these problems with better monitoring the grid. We can solve these problems with new interconnection technologies. Of course, there's new generation of renewables that are in the future. Do you think that technology offers the chance to solve some of these issues if we're proactive? And then getting into that, what do you think the next 5 years look like for the crisis that you predict?
Well, I really am an optimist, and I really do think that we ultimately will, in fact, work our way out of this situation. I'm concerned about the timing, as I've expressed, but I think we're going to see a number of things. If you want some predictions, I think 15 to 20 years from now, we're going to look at current penetration of wind and solar into the market and say, that really was a transitional energy source, that it is not the source that's going to be the long-term answer for us.
Big question then.
I think that we are going to see just quantum leaps forward in technology on the nuclear side. I think that ultimately is going to be a huge part of the answer. We've got a situation in Montana where we have 2 coal-fired units in southeast Montana generating about 1,500 megawatts, a lot of power. And we are having discussions just conceptually about retrofitting those units with SMRs. And the industry folks are saying that it can be done by 2035. And that we conceivably could preserve that base load generation and, in fact, make it carbon free. Now, there are folks that want to shut those assets down by 2025. There is nothing on the board to replace 1,500 megawatts of dispatchable generation by 2025. And that's not. That's just a fact. It's just a fact. Yeah. There's nothing to replace it. So what does that leave as an alternative? Unfortunately, you get to the point where there's one tool left in the toolbox, and that's called shedding load. And again, I'm not suggesting, I want to make clear, I'm certainly not saying that Northwestern's about to shed load.
Right, no.
We're not saying that. But if we get into that dire situation where there's that kind of shortfall of available capacity, that's the tool that's left, is the point that I'm making. And even MISO is talking about that possibility if everything goes wrong at once.
I've got 2 final questions then. First, for those of us that are working on trying to collect data that comes from regulation, what are some of the most important data sources? And then I want to ask if you've got any final thoughts for our audience. And our audience is many of the commission staffs that weren't able to join us in person here in New Orleans for the NARUC conference, and then also regulated utility staffs are tuning into our webcast as well. So I want to ask for final thoughts for them. But then, so first, what are some of the regulatory data sources that we're going to need to track this transition, and what should companies like HData be thinking about doing?
Of course, everything that comes, nearly everything, there's of course some trade secret stuff that's protected, but generally speaking, everything that comes to the commission with regard to a rate case for a utility is public information that's readily available through certainly our commission, and I would guess most. This organization, the NARUC, is a wealth of information, and they love to respond to those requests of
Some people like responding to information.
what's going on here, and how do I find this, and what's and so those two, your state commission and NARUC, if you can't find it through those two sources, I don't know where to send you.
Sounds good. I want to ask for our HData team to slot our next speaker in, and while we're working on that, final question or final request for your thoughts. What would you like to leave our audience with? Those that weren't lucky enough to come to New Orleans in person, but are tuning into the webcast. Anything else you'd like for them to know?
I just kind of leave this overarching thought with y'all, and that is that almost without exception, public policy that's driven by emotion ends up being bad public policy. We have a huge emotional component in this argument that's being waged today in terms of how rapidly we're going to make the transition to renewables from traditional sources. We need to step back, take a deep breath, and let some reality come into that discussion so that we don't create massive unintended consequences. And I'm afraid we're on that track right now if we don't take that deep breath and step back.
All right. Well, Vice Chair Brad Johnson of the Montana Public Service Commission, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Appreciate you.
There.
Okay. We've got another one coming right in. Thanks, Mr. Vice Chair. Come on in.
I'm up next.
All right.
Next, we're going to welcome Michelle Benani. He's the CEO of Rhizome and has spent over 10 years working in the digitization of energy regulation. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks for having me, Mr. Hollister.
We've got two main overarching questions for all of our participants in this webcast this afternoon. First, we're asking folks to share, for those that weren't lucky enough to be in person at NARUC, asking folks to share what are one or two of the things that they've learned that they might not have otherwise have learned. What are some of the big takeaways from our conference so far? And then second, a technological prediction. What do you expect is going to change in the way that the utility regulatory space uses technology? So those two questions, and I think some other ones are going to flow from that.
Yeah.
So first, well, actually tell us a bit about Rhizome, and then tell us what your main recollections so far have been from our conference.
Sure thing. So I am the CEO of Rhizome. Rhizome's a climate resilience planning solution that utilities can essentially use to identify vulnerabilities on the grid and then quantify the value of resilience of investments that they're trying to make to reduce the risk of future extreme weather events.
Fantastic. And as the CEO of Rhizome, you're thinking about how the utility regulators are reacting to rising challenges to the grid. You're thinking about that from a public policy perspective and also from a business perspective. You're balancing several different ones. Given that, what are the most important things you've learned so far?
Social equity. It's going to be a major piece of concern moving forward as we plan investments, not only in resilience, but as we plan smart grid investments, as clean energy investments. Social equity is going to be a major consideration moving forward. A lot of it is direction that's set by the federal government. We have a lot of representatives from the federal government here today that are interacting with states and trying to understand how various investments in all different states where you have billions of dollars being poured into the energy sector, those benefits of all of those investments, how they're disproportionately or proportionately spread across those communities where they're typically underserved, varying from things like transportation burden, energy burden, age, disability, so on and so forth.
So I've got a couple questions about that then. We know that there's some utility regulators are the state laws differ, so utility regulators have different levels, the different levers that they can pull. What are some examples of social equity or social equity informed policies that you see happening on the state utility commission level?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is it comes from legislation or otherwise state work or state direction that has been done on the matter. So typically states have their own environmental departments where they have collected a lot of data related to the communities within those states. And so now state legislation as well as utility regulators are directing utilities to better use the data that's available related to social equity and environmental justice that has already been created within the state and apply those as a layer onto the investments that they're already making, right? So again, it could be clean energy investments, it could be resilience investments, it could be looking at disparities with reliability across the system. And then what's really important is that as new jobs are being created as well, that those jobs and the workforces that are being developed are within the communities that actually need jobs to be created.
Now, social equity is not what your platform is focused on. You're focused on resilience data. How do you see Rhizome being able to implement insights about the social equity impact of energy regulatory decisions in the resiliency, the resiliency understanding your platform engenders?
Well, we saw the writing on the wall with the passing of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is that it called for $1.2 trillion of investment being spent on our infrastructure. At around the same time, an executive order from the Biden administration directed that any federal investment going to states or going to communities, really just going to America, 40% of the benefits of that infrastructure has to be going to underserved communities. And those underserved communities are judged by a series of criteria that really help characteristically define the people who are underserved and under-resourced in the country. Some of the things that I mentioned before, income is a big one, right? Minority groups and disabilities and people where they don't have access to resources like grocery stores within a mile, or don't have access to public transit and stuff like that.
You're going to be able to put those insights onto a platform where they're visible alongside the cost of an investment, for instance.
That's right.
And alongside the resilience of a particular piece of infrastructure.
That's right. So in addition to a massive amount of grid resilience funding coming from the federal government, they're directing utilities to follow that Justice 40 initiative created at the federal level. We've been proactively looking at federal data sources and starting to look at state level data sources characterizing those disparities within communities.
I've got two other questions I want to ask. I want to ask you a prediction, and I can, since you're the CEO of a data and platform company that's working to transform utility regulation, I think I can probably guess what the answer to the question is going to be, but I'm still going to ask about your predicted question. And then I would also like you to think a little bit about the audience that we have for this webcast. We have staffs of utility commissions and team members at utilities who might not be with us in New Orleans for the NARUC conference, but are still interested in utility regulation. So some thoughts for them and what you'd like for them to lead. So first, what's your prediction for the next 5 years for the technological transformation of utility regulation?
I think we're going to see a lot more technology coming into the resilience space, Hudson. And it's not only going to be on the software side of things. There's going to be a lot of hardware that's deployed to mitigate wildfires, to help predict where floods can happen in vulnerable areas, doing situational awareness around extreme weather events, and to help improve, at the end of the day, customer service in the form of resilience and reliability, right? I think the expectation is getting higher in terms of electric service in this country. And then I think we've seen a lot of the negative impacts when things can fall short in terms of service. When we see extreme weather events, we see a catastrophic loss of life and devastating impacts to communities. So I think the technological advancements are increasing in resilience, but that's not to discount where technology is also increasing in terms of smart grid adoption to give customers more choice to their energy sources, as well as decarbonization, right? Making sure that our gas system is decarbonized and making sure that our electric sector as a whole is a little bit cleaner.
In a minute, I'm going to ask for our HData team to queue up our final live speaker, and then after that, we're going to have some introductions to the HData platform. But as our team is getting the final live speaker in place, one more question for you, Michelle. Sure. Thank you again for joining us. What are a couple of the thoughts that you'd like for our audience to lead with as they think about the whole picture of utility regulation?
If you care about energy policy in any respect, whether it's that your utility bill is too high, or you care about making things cleaner, things run more efficiently related to our energy system, NARUC is literally the place to be for that. We have the most electrifying discussions that are out here. So my recommendation is literally to come out, show up, and just interact with some of the folks that are around here. These sessions are great, so make sure to attend. To spend time learning from the people who are experts in this space, but then just being around and around the environment where people are making some really tough but important decisions related to the future of our energy systems and water systems. My recommendation is just to be in the middle of it and be part of those conversations.
Michelle Fadani, CEO of Rhizome, thank you so much for joining us on the FERC Professionals Group webcast this afternoon.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much.
And we're slotting the last speaker in, the last live speaker, that is. In a moment, we're going to be welcoming Nick Wagner, the VP of Colorado Regulatory Affairs for Black Hills Energy. Right on cue. Nick, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, no, thanks
We've
for
got
having
an
me.
audience this afternoon of folks some that have been part of NARUC, and others that might be elsewhere in the country and that are joining the webcast in order to learn a little bit what's going on at the NARUC conference. Some commission staff, some regulated utility staff, and some tech companies.
Great.
So Nick, thank you so much for spending some time. We've got the lights dimming. We know why. We've got
somebody hit the switch.
it probably just in order to make our webcast a little bit more fun.
A little bit, yes, that definitely.
So the band's going to play on. The show must go on. Tell us a little bit about your work at Black Hills, and then I've got a couple questions for you about what you're learning at this time.
Yeah, sure. For Black Hills, I'm the VP of Regulatory Affairs and Policy in Colorado. I also manage our energy efficiency team enterprise-wide, and then our rate design team. And so we've got gas and electric in 3 states: Wyoming, Colorado, and South Dakota, and then gas only in Arkansas, Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska, and I think I got them all.
And so here, this is probably one of the busiest points and highest points of the work that you do, because this conference is where you interact with the utility commissions, with the state level regulators, where the relationships are very important for the operation of all that infrastructure. What are some of the things that you've learned at this particular NARUC conference here in New Orleans?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, like you mentioned, the relationships, building that, but also understanding what are other utilities dealing with, what are commissions dealing with, what are commission staff. So really that for me is kind of the piece for getting here, is understanding, we've got issues that we're dealing with, what issues, how are other states dealing with those, other utilities, that type of thing, but also what might be coming down the path. So really that kind of maybe the key messages that I've seen or been talking with us about this past few days is affordability. Affordability for customers, it's critically important for us. It's critically important for our customers. We got the natural gas prices that have gone up. We've got infrastructure that needs to be going in the ground. So for us, we're really looking at that and how do we kind of soften that blow for our customers. Some of the other things dealing with, looking at electrification, EVs, those types of things. So yeah, it's been a good time. Like I said, it's really great to just be able to get together and be able to build those relationships, have those conversations, get to see people that we maybe haven't seen for a while.
My other question has to do with the theme of the conference, which is innovative and disruptive technology.
Yeah.
Connecting the dots of innovative and disruptive technology. Let's ask for your 5-year prediction. What's one aspect of technological transformation that you think is going to hit the utility regulatory space in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think what I hope happens is we've seen a little bit at the FERC and kind of what you guys are working on, right? With the ability to do some filings online without the substantial administrative burden, being able to file this stuff. So I'm hoping the states are a little bit further behind on that. It takes a little bit of money to kind of put those systems in place, but so I'm really hoping that's an area where the state commissions will be able to kind of catch up and do more. That it's a lot more automated from that standpoint. And the other thing I think, and maybe not so much on the regulatory side, but just using the data that we have to understand how our customers are using our products, and how can we help them utilize that data, or us utilize that data to help them use our services in a more effective manner for their use.
Great. Those are some great predictions. And of course, I agree. We would love to digitize more of the regulatory process, make the filings automatic, and then open up more of that corpus of information to being analyzed so that we can understand and predict what's happening in these critical industries.
Yeah, definitely.
So Nick, the last thing I want to do is I'm going to ask you if there's any other thoughts that you want to leave our audience with. While we're doing that, I want to make sure that our HData team is queuing up the next portion of our webcast, which is will be a quick look at the platform hosted by Luke Ashton, our regulatory economist. So as they're doing that, final question, what's one understanding you would like to leave our audience of utility commission staffs and utility team members, what's one thought you'd like to leave them with?
Yeah, I mean, for me, NARUC has been a big part of, prior as on a commission on the Iowa Utilities Board. NARUC was a huge part for me of learning, understanding, building those relationships, like you said. So if you have the opportunity to get engaged, NARUC is, I would say, probably one of the premier places where you can come learn about what's going on in the utility space, understand what, from a regulatory standpoint, what's going on, who's involved, where things are going. So really, from that perspective, that's what I would say. NARUC is a great opportunity to do that and build great relationships and friendships that you'll have for years to come.
We agree. Nick Wagner, VP of Colorado Regulatory Affairs for Black Hills Energy. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you. You guys have a great day.
Enjoy your conference. We're going to next turn things right over in a minute to the HData team, and we're going to move from the live webcast portion to remote for a look at the transformation of FERC regulation. I'm really pleased to turn the floor over to Luke Ashton, who is the regulatory economist of HData, who's going to give us about 15 minutes of new understanding in how technological transformation leads to innovation. As we've talked about at the beginning of this webcast, last year, the FERC decided to stop using PDFs and use digital data instead for all the information that it collects from electric utilities, gas utilities, and midstream oil pipelines. That transformation from PDF documents into searchable data is what allowed the HData platform to bring new ways to analyze the information that gets reported from the regulated utilities upward to the regulator. You heard it from Nick Wagner a few minutes ago. We want to see that happen on the state level as well. So far, it's federal. The information that you're going to see is federal. You will see how it's possible to digitally analyze the information that goes from the utilities upwards to the regulator. So to give us a quick look at that and how the HData platform is facilitating analysis, I'm pleased to turn things over to the regulatory economist at HData, Luke Ashton. Luke, fire away. Can I get off? Okay.